I was shot on June 16, 1975, pursuing 4 hijackers of a mail truck with a $100,000 payroll. I was shot twice in the head with a shotgun and was lucky to survive.
In this episode, I'm talking to Dana Owen. Dana's a former MDC police officer and author of the book Shotgunned. I've actually done an episode with Dana before called The 10 Hills Gang. If you haven't listened to it, you should. In this episode, Dana's going a little bit deeper into the robbery of the Hilltop Steakhouse. If you're from the Northeast, I'm pretty sure you've driven by that big cactus. Did you know that a guard was shot while on duty there? Did you know that a crew from Somerville stole $57,000 in cash? Well, now's your chance to find out how they did it. Welcome to the Old Dirty Boston podcast. Dana Owens is the author of Shotgunned. Tells a story of when he was shot and wounded as a police officer in pursuit of a group known as the 10 Hills Gang in Somerville. We actually have a podcast on record with Dana already, the 10 Hills Gang. You can go back and listen to that. I'll make sure I put a link in it. But it's an unbelievable story, and I'm really excited and happy to have him back on because today we're going to be talking about the infamous robbery of the Hilltop Steakhouse on Route 1. So it's such an iconic landmark that millions of people have driven by. I would say anyone from New England probably recognizes it, and very few people that I know have ever heard of the robbery. So I'm really excited to learn more about it, and you're probably the man that can tell that story better than anyone.
Thank you.
Why don't you give people a little bit of context and history of like how you started paying attention to these guys, and we're going to call them the 10 Hills Gang. For all intents and purposes, I think that kind of summarizes it. But
we named them the 10 Hills Gang because they operated out of the 10 Hills Cafe on Mr. Kevin in Somerville. I was shot on June 16, 1975, pursuing 4 hijackers of a mail truck with a $100,000 payroll. I was shot twice in the head with a shotgun and was lucky to survive. The investigation began, and the informants started telling us who it was pretty quick. Looking at the police reports, they had done 4 bank robberies about 30 days apart before they did my crime. So they had been staking things out and doing the jobs, and they had a lot of help. They rented cars, they rented disguises, they rented guns. They were an organized crime, but I actually had a meeting with Howie Winter in 2010, and he confirmed they were not members of the Winter Hill Gang, but trying to work their way up. So I was working on the case, and this was in September. My bosses on the MDC police knew that I was doing it. It was kind of unauthorized. I'd get a lot of information and give it to the feds, the U.S. Federal Postal Inspectors, sitting on the 10 Hills Cafe, seeing who had what car, getting licenses, registrations, and so forth.
do you think that those guys knew that they were being surveilled?
Positively. The postal inspectors, right after I was shot, from a surveillance van, took pictures. And the last picture, Jimmy Hackett gave them the finger looking over at the van. So there was no question in our mind. They knew what was going on.
And what made them so brazen? And this is what's hard for me to understand is, we see the world, or I see the world as kind of a black and white of, if you're a criminal and the police know you're a criminal, they're going to arrest you. So was it always just about not having the right evidence at the right time and having to go by the book?
It was, but I think Hackett and company just didn't really care. They've been interviewed by the FBI, by the state police. They must have, at some point in time, figured they really had nothing on them because they wanted one of them to confess. They got so brazen that, like I said, they're giving the feds the finger. That's about as brazen as you can get. The 10 Hills Cafe, from my investigation, they were known to drink beer and snort coke. And I think a lot of the drugs was involved in how they behaved. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that bar was eventually closed down because of cocaine. There was so much there that it was raided and shut down. It was kind of just known as a cocaine central.
I think so, and I think it's now an auto parts store. Last time I was by there a few years ago.
So I think I've told you this in the past, but my dad was a regular at 10 Hills Cafe. He grew up in the Mystic Projects, and that was kind of their go-to place to hang. I've asked him about Jimmy Hackett and all of that, and he really said, he didn't have much or anything to do with Hackett. Those guys were sort of just the guys that would come in. They would be there a lot during the day, but nobody messed with them. Nobody, everybody kind of knew their MO, and everybody kept their distance.
I can believe that. And when I tailed them, they were known at night to go over to Pal Joey's and the back room and some other places were actually pretty much organized crime bathrooms.
And Howie kind of gave you a disassociation with them of, no, we didn't really have a connection, and is that correct?
Yeah, he did. He was very honest. He said he did some business with Hackett's older brother. we had mentioned that Jimmy Hackett on the street was saying he was going to take over, a hostile takeover of the Winter Hill Gang, and Howie just kind of laughed it off. By the way, my interview with Howie was fascinating. Very forthright, very intelligent man. Honestly, nothing what I expected after seeing a few pictures of him years and years ago.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you stay in control or have that much power in the city of Somerville or anywhere, really, if you don't have your wits about you.
No, he was really a CEO of a company, and the company happened to be an organized crime gang.
So that's one thing that I talked about with our mutual friend Bobby Martini is I think back then, guys that really had a lot of ambition that were essentially poor, that weren't book smart kind of guys, I don't know what options they had in the legal route to say, hey, I want to really get rich and this is how I'm going to do it. Did you ever feel a little bit of, admiration is probably the wrong word, but like hey, those guys have some balls to be doing this shit. Was there any of that kind of mixed in? Not with the 10 Hills crew. When I talked to Howie Winter, and back in the day, we'll go back in the 60s and 70s, the gangs had a set of rules. They didn't go after reporters. They didn't go after honest cops. They'd go after a dirty cop. But the 10 Hills gang, after the Hilltop, I lost any respect I might have had for them. Yeah. Well, I would separate the 10 Hills guys from that group. I meant more Howie Winter and the Winter Hill Gang, because there did seem to be a code of ethics within that world.
Oh, without a doubt. And when I worked with some of the investigators, Jack Dwyer, who was a Somerville sergeant, I think, who made state police lieutenant detective, he was one of our main sources. And he really filled me in on how the gang worked. And he was liked by both sides. The good guys liked him, the bad guys liked him. He was very honest. He met with his informants. He had a network of informants. I was very impressed. And often the gang didn't know who the informants were.
Right.
Or they would have taken them out.
Yeah. And I've asked you this in the past, the connection with Winter Hill and drugs, and do you think that they were connected to the trafficking of the drugs? And the more interviews that I've done, I'm actually going to say firmly that I really don't think they were connected to it. People that I know now that admitted that in the 80s and 90s were selling a lot of cocaine in Somerville said it did not go through the Hill. There were other things that they controlled, but they really kept their nose out of drugs. Yeah. From what I could ascertain, I would agree with you fully. I never could. And as far as the 10 Hills Cafe, when I was surveilling it, it was more they were using than they were selling. It might have changed after that, but they were using. The 10 Hills gang, they'd get coked up before they do a job. Right. So, if you would like to, let's jump right into what happened at the Hilltop. Sure. I was late September of 1975. I was sitting on the 10 Hills Cafe. Used to use my own car, 72 Dodge Dart, kind of inconspicuous car. I would throw different plates on it because these guys could get a listing as fast as I could on the car. They were all cold plates. They came back to nobody. And how long after you being shot did this happen? I was shot in June. This was October. This was the late September, a few months. And how long was your recovery? How long were you in the hospital? I was in the hospital for several weeks, but my wife was a registered nurse, and because of that, and the hospital I was in, they let me out early. When you're in a hospital a period of time, you've got screamers at night, you don't get any sleep, you're not getting any better. I just wanted to get out of there. Yeah. And was it kind of eating away at you knowing that those guys were on the street and you couldn't wait to get back in and try and catch them, really? Yeah. My favorite saying is, when I was a kid, I'd watch the Cowboys, and the good guys in the white hats always won, not the guys in the black hats, and that just was eating away at me. Yeah. Okay, so you would, in your extra time, and how much time would you spend on it? Would you consider yourself obsessive about it? Yeah, I was obsessed with it. I couldn't let it go. My wife, luckily, was very tolerant. She wasn't happy about what I was doing. She knew I had to do it. I'd sit down there whenever I could. Whenever I got a chance, I'd be sitting on the cafe. Yeah. And one thing that bothered me, I'd drive by there in a cruiser, and they always had a lookout. Always had a lookout. It was either a kid wanting to be a gangster or one of the main gang. And every once in a while, I'd just drive by there in the slow with the MDC cruiser to let them know we still had a peek on them. So when we did our first interview, you had sent me some photographs, and I wanted to check in with some Somerville people, and I didn't really get many answers. I was surprised by that. because I know some people that used to hang out at 10 Hills. But now the audience has really been growing for the podcast. And if you're okay with it, I would love to put some of those photographs up and ask the general public if anybody knows any of those faces.
Absolutely, and I can send you some more, too.
Yeah, that would be, I think that would be great. And I'm sure that people will know some people and make some connections.
Yep, without a doubt.
Okay, so you've been trailing them, and you catch these guys take off, and they're heading north?
Well, that particular night, 3 guys got out and got into one of the cars driven by one of the wheelmen. And I don't get into a lot of names except for the guys we convicted. That's just not my thing, or guys that are dead. But 3 males hopped into the car. I knew he was one of the wheelmen. I couldn't get a look at who they were.
When you say he, you mean Hackett?
I didn't know if Hackett was in the car or not.
Okay.
It could have been Richie Manane, or it could have been another kid that was one of the wheelmen. I just didn't know, but I know the car was in and out of there all the time, so it was worth following with 3 guys in it.
Right.
I didn't know where they were going, so I started following them. They went down the Fells Way from Somerville. They went up Route 1 to the Hilltop Steakhouse, which my wife and I used to go there all the time. I loved the Hilltop Steakhouse. I probably had the best steaks in the world at the time. I know it was the largest grossing, independently owned restaurant for 11 years in the United States.
Yeah.
So they pulled in there, and I went, they're just going to go for a steak. They're just going to have a steak. And they pulled into the parking lot. They just kept going around, and they pulled back out, and they headed south on Route 1. And they took off at a pretty good rate of speed. Being a cop, to me, this was a timed run. They were going to see how long it took them to get there and how long it took them to get back. They planned all their jobs. We had a lot of good informants. They tried to do a job about every 30 days. They hadn't done a job since I got shot for obvious reasons, because there was a lot of heat from the feds and so forth. So now we're into September. The next day I went into my detective unit and I told them, and they knew I was working on this, that they probably think, hey, look, good for the kid to do, but, he's not a detective. And I gave them the information, and these guys are the detectives a lot older than me, and they said, yeah, good information, kid, we'll take a look at it. About 4 days later, on October 3rd, 1975, in a daytime robbery, a Wells Fargo guy named Louis Silva was shot and killed, and the gang that held it up got $57,000.
And real quick, if we jump back, the detectives that you went to, was that in the MDC? Was that what?
That was in the MDC. I didn't bring that to the postal inspectors because I wasn't working with them that much at the time. I was a uniform cop. I was really kind of sticking out on my own and doing a few things. So I gave it to the MDC detectives. When I look back on it, I probably don't blame them. They probably figured, hey, the kid's got to do something, but he doesn't know what he's doing.
Okay. And how old were you at that time?
Let's see. I was 25 when I got shot. So I was still 25. And my birthday would be next August. I was 25 years old.
And did you feel like there was in law enforcement, because I think in any group there's always kind of an ABC level in terms of how hard people want to work, how engaged people want to be, how hungry they are to chase things. Did you feel like there was kind of a complacency or a lack of? I really didn't know. One of the problems was originally we believed this was done by the Winter Hill gang. And a lot of the MDC cops and other investigators lived in Somerville and knew the Winter Hill gang. So I didn't know how much of it was they didn't want to get involved. They were lazy. I didn't know at the time. And I was going to the MDC detective bosses, not the 2 guys that were assigned to the case, who actually got thrown off the case. Either they were corrupt or they were lazy. I never could figure out both. Right.
But we had 2 MDC detectives they actually had a used car lot up on Winter Hill that was sanctioned by Howie Winter, we heard. So they were removed from the case at the request of the postal inspectors.
And how common was it back then for police to sort of have, even if they didn't have a direct kind of financial relationship, just have we don't want to touch that. It's not worth the headache of any repercussion.
I found out it was more common than I thought. Like I said, I was a uniform cop. I really knew nothing about the investigative bureaus and stuff. I learned as I went along. It was a little more prevalent in the Boston area than I knew. especially when you start looking at things like Marty Bulger and the FBI.
Did that really disappoint you? You know, as a young law enforcement guy who was really straight up, and obviously you'd given so much. I mean, you were almost killed doing your job.
It disappointed me, but I was pretty focused on sooner or later I was going to catch these guys. That was my goal. When I got shot the second time, my partner said, "You want to give this up?" And I said, "It's the last effing thing I ever do. I'm going to catch these guys." And I was pretty committed to that.
If you could go back to the night when you had been shot, would you still have pursued that car or that truck?
Yes. I looked at that as my duty. It honestly pissed me off when I got shot the first time, so we pursued him for about another 10 minutes. I was very focused on these guys needed to be taken off the street, and I kind of resorted back to my training, and I wasn't going to give it up.
Yeah. All right, so you've put in a reporter. You've spoken to the lead detectives, and they gave you a bit of a brush off. And
yes.
How much longer after that was the robbery actually?
3 days later, 3 or 4 days later.
And you knew instantly, as soon as you heard about it. I had it.
Once I was notified, the postal inspectors called me because they knew who the suspects were, and John Grider had been shot at the Hilltop, and he was a prime suspect in the mail hijacking, along with Jimmy Hackett, David Toppy, Richie Manane, and possibly Peter Hackett. And he dropped a gun when he got... What happened was there were two guys hanging around Gia Frida's office. It was kind of wide open. I always believed they had an inside source. And the Wells Fargo guy went in, Louis Silva. I know a very good friend of his, Elder Rosa, who I've talked to on numerous occasions. And Louis Silva's attitude was, I don't like wearing a vest, they're too bulky. I don't like a shotgun. I don't even like carrying a handgun. This money is insured. If somebody comes up to me, I'm not going to get in a shootout. I'm going to give them the money. It's all insured anyway. So That's how he taught guys to do the job. So he went in, he picked up 2 money bags containing $57,000 in receipts and cash. He's walking out. Jimmy Hackett walked up behind him after reading a newspaper, stuck a .38 in his back, and shot him through the heart for absolutely no reason.
Wow.
As he was collapsing, he managed to draw his revolver, spin around, and shoot. I don't know how many rounds, but he hit Grider in the stomach with a Super Valve .38, which, if you know that, it's a hollow point. And Grider went down and dropped a Walther PPK that was on a list of guns we had, in our case, from an informant seen in a barn in Wilmington, Mass. So everything started to really tie together at that point.
When you say that gun, what was it, the PPK?
Yep.
When that gun was found, it was found at the scene because Grider had dropped it?
Found at the scene. Grider had dropped it. We found out later Grider had possession of it during the mail robbery I was shot in, and kept it. And he actually claims he was interviewed by 2 detectives down in South Water Road someplace. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. But he had the gun. It was on a list of guns we had from an informant, and that's when we tied it all together.
And the
bullet that...
the informant would have helped sell those drugs to 10 Hills?
The informant was actually a former North Reading cop.
Okay.
And he had written down the make, model, and serial number of the guns, which...
But he had sold the guns to the 10 Hills guys?
Most of the guns were stolen or rented. We had, I think I told you before, David Donahue had bought the shotguns. I was shot with a shotgun. One of the handguns was taken in a bank robbery in Newton Waltham Bank. They came from all different places, but they were seen in a barn kept in a locker at a horse farm.
Got it,
and
okay.
The informant recorded the serial numbers and everything, which was cold turkey, months before the crimes happened. So they pick up Grider, and they drag him into a car. The bullet shattered his large intestine, small intestine, part of his spleen, and a part of his colon. They brought in the 10 Hills gang, knew a nurse whose name I don't want to give, and she met with them, and she said, no, he's dead. We can't do anything. He's going to die.
Wow.
So Grider wanted to go to his sister's house, and the gang instead, I guess when he passed out, dumped him on the street in front of Somerville Hospital.
And where did his sister live?
I don't really want to get into that because some of these people are still alive.
Okay.
But she was pretty local.
Was she in Somerville? Or?
I think so.
Okay.
I never did find out.
I actually went to school. I was good friends with Grider's niece growing up, and I never knew any of that history, but I remember my dad had mentioned to me at one point, and he always wondered. His sister would always say she never knew where he was, but because my dad and Greider grew up together in the projects, and they were friends up until that shift started to happen. I think when cocaine got really heavy in Somerville, it took a lot of people in a really extreme, left turn into the Badlands, and people went a little bit crazy. Luckily, he was a working guy, he was a union guy, and he didn't get sucked into it, but a lot of people did.
Yeah, they did, and I actually interviewed Greider before we got him to testify in the mail case. Pretty interesting interview. I guess he came back pretty messed up from Vietnam.
Yeah, he had done multiple tours, right? I think 2 or 3 tours.
That's what I heard, yeah. I heard he'd done multiple tours.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, my dad commented on. He came back with a real, I don't give a fuck kind of attitude. Like, they said some people considered that they had almost died in Vietnam, and so anything they had left, they were just going to go to the extreme, and he basically took Vietnam back with him, kept the guns, kept the violence going, and fueled it with drugs.
Exactly. And when we...
did he have any remorse when you talked to him?
We interviewed him. Go ahead.
Did he have any remorse when you spoke to him?
No. Matter of fact, during the trial, one of the postal inspectors was in there, and the defense counsel was asking him questions, and Jimmy Hackett's defense counsel, and this guy's name was Harvey Brower, who eventually went to jail for drugs. And he kind of got on Greider, and the prosecutor got on Greider, and the prosecutor said, well, what are you shooting at the cops for? He said, because I wanted to kill him.
Yeah.
So when I interviewed him, he never found out who I was after the interview in Wisconsin in the federal prison until after he testified in the Hilltop trial. During the interview in Wisconsin, he said to Bill O'Leary, the lead postal inspector. By the way, we introduced me as Dana Owen, and we didn't say where I was from. I flashed him my ID, like you see the FBI flashing their ID. He didn't pay any attention, so he assumed I was a postal inspector because I dressed that way.
Right.
And didn't know I was the guy that got shot. I was always worried about that, but after we shut the tape off after an hour, I still got the tape. He said, O'Leary said, so how's the MDC cop doing that got shot? He said, we couldn't get him off our ass. We had to shoot him. Mm-hmm. So O'Leary looked at me, and I thought he was going to... O'Leary had the grin of a leprechaun. He's a great guy.
Right.
He looked at me, and he said, he's doing pretty good, John. Next time I see him, I'll tell him you were asking for him.
Well, that must have felt good that he's sitting in prison, and you're, you kind of hold all the cards at that point.
It did. And as you read in the book, the way the interview went, that was a little tricky from time to time. But
so you actually have a tape of that interview?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Would you ever be open to sharing that?
I think I can. I will find out.
If you could share that interview, I know that people would, I mean myself personally, but I think the audience would be really, thrilled or excited or something, but to just actually put a face to the name and sort of see how this person actually engaged and interacted. And I'm sure for you it was a big deal to sit next to him. That must have been a big moment. It was a very tricky moment. Bill O'Leary pushed for me to go out there. He felt I was a professional. He told me we're on the way out there, you got to be straight-faced. He says something, you can't get pissed off. You can't show any emotion. Can you do that? And I said yes. And Bill and I became the best of friends. And if you ever watched the old Dragnet series, Bill would remind you of Jack Webb on Dragnet. He was a great guy. He passed away a few years ago. He was a tremendous guy. After you had that interview, did that bring up a lot of emotion for you? Did you, the next few days or week or so, did it have any effect, good or bad?
Interestingly enough, it didn't. We were so busy. We had to fly from Wisconsin to Boston. We had 5 days left on the statute of limitations. It was coming down to 5 days left. They had to transcribe all of the tapes and present it to the U.S. attorney, and we actually indicted him 5 days before the federal statute was going to run, the 5-year statute. So we were so busy, there was really no time to have any emotion.
Wow. Okay, so I'd like to let you continue where we sort of left off. So Greider, the robbery happened, what time of day was it?
I think it was around noontime. It was daylight.
Okay, so it was the middle of the day. there must have been dozens of witnesses. Did the men wear masks or anything to hide their identity?
Nothing.
And there was no security camera footage or anything?
Not to my knowledge, and there were a lot of witnesses. I went to the pretrial hearings and the trial. Harvey Brower would ask the witnesses who were on the stand, please state your name and address. And the 10 Hills Gang guys, they had a lot of leg breakers, would sit there with a notebook, writing their name and address down. Wow. He'd ask them 3 or 4 times, so they knew damn well that these guys were copying their address. Judge did nothing about it. I couldn't believe it.
There's no protection around that, or
they're supposed to be. I found out there was none. I did a talk a few years ago at a library in the North Shore, and a couple came up to me afterwards. This is my wife, so and so. She was one of the jurors in the Hilltop trial. He said, "I want you to know what you talked about, how bad it was. It was so bad. The gang came to our house and threatened us. And my wife, I'm quite sure the wife was for the not guilty like the rest of them. And we had to move. We had to get out of our house because they threatened our lives."
Wow.
So they were a very organized gang at the time. Like I said, they were probably going to take over the Winter Hill Gang if they could.
Yeah.
The Hilltop was the coup de grace that killed it for them.
And so these were 10 Hills guys that were sitting in the courtroom writing down the names.
Yes, exactly. So they asked the state police detectives, who were a lot of former cops. You could take a civil service exam, so former Somerville cops, Beverly cops. And the guy they asked said, "Sure, we'll protect you." They never did a thing. Then it gets really convoluted because remember I told you there was a nurse that took care of Grider and said he's going to die anyway? Yeah. The cops found out about that through snitches, and she decided to testify about Grider being shot. So the feds put her, the state police put her under protection, and the state police lieutenant detective was I think he was a former Salem cop, ended up having an affair with her. And he was the lead investigator on the case. He actually ended up marrying her a few years later. Wow. So the feds had a lot of doubts about how the trial was conducted, and Hackett was found not guilty, and Grider had pled guilty to second-degree murder. And then they put a contract out on the Grider, naturally. It was a mess.
Okay, so it's midday. The robbery has happened. Grider's now been dropped off in front of the Somerville Hospital. Was it at night? Was it?
I don't know what time of day they dumped him off. I'm guessing it was later on that afternoon.
Yeah, because if they had taken him to the nurse, that would have been at least a couple hours. So so let's assume in the afternoon he's dumped in the street in Somerville. What happens from there?
Well, the newspaper said that he was deceased, just like they did with me. They jumped the gun. He was taken into federal protective custody and arrested. So he was under federal protective custody and under arrest at the same time. I don't know where. I think he was put in the Norfolk Prison Hospital. I'm not sure. That gets all really hard to follow. But he survives the wounds, and they talked to him, and he's going to testify. However, he will only testify if they're going to drop charges against him, which they're not going to drop a second-degree murder charge. However, he gives them the name of Jimmy Hackett, David Toppy, Peter Hackett, Richie Manane, involved in the bank robberies and the mail hijacking. I still have all the police reports, but he would not go to court and testify. And that went on for years. He made a deal that he wouldn't do Walpole time because Walpole was so bad at the time. So they put him in Norfolk House of Correction. He got in a fist fight against the deal, put him in Walpole. He was stabbed in Walpole a day or two after he got there. He was stabbed in the stomach where he got shot.
And did he say if he thought that was coming from orders from Hackett or Winter Hill or
whoever put the contract out? I think the Hacketts put the contract out. You'll never ever find out who actually puts out a contract.
Really?
But yes, he thought it was planned hit. They were going to take him out for testifying.
Would you assume it was coming through Hackett or was coming through?
I don't think it came through Howie Winter. I don't think he wanted to get involved with these guys. Hackett's older brother was kind of a big timer. I'm guessing now. I don't know. Like everything I did in my book, like I told you in the last interview, I made absolutely sure it was factual. And I stayed away from mentioning the names of dead people. I don't like doing that.
Honestly, I mean, I blew through the book. It was really captivating. There were, for me, coming from Somerville, and having a little bit of personal connection made it even that much more exciting. But for anyone that hasn't read it, I really, really have to urge you, if you care anything about what the Irish mob, the Boston mob, what organized crime looked like, and sort of how wild and crazy things were in the 70s, you really need to read the book. Your story itself of going through the recovery, how this affected your family, and how it pushed you to just stay on these guys and stay after them and keep going, I thought was really incredible. So I can't recommend it strongly enough. I tell everyone, you have to read the book. And again,
I appreciate that.
It's Shotgun.
It's on Amazon and Kindle, Shotgun, and I've got 37 or 38 5-star reviews. People love it. A couple people say you should make a movie out of it, and I've actually been contacted by a Hollywood screenplay writer who is doing that at the present time.
That's very exciting. I wish you the best of luck with it. I think that it really deserves it, and I hope it would blow me away, and I'd be very excited to see that come to fruition. That would be exciting.
Next two of us.
Yeah. Okay, so now Hackett is in prison. Grider is in prison. Hackett and the rest of those guys, Toppy, are they still hanging at 10 Hills? They're still free on the streets? Did they disappear?
I don't know if they went to back to the 10 Hills. I didn't see them. I think they stayed away.
Oh, I mean kind of the following weeks.
Richie Manane, the wheelman, took off for Arizona. My opinion, and the Fed's opinion that I work with, we felt he was a snitch for the FBI. The FBI did a couple things to kind of throw off track with him, which was in the book. They arrest him finally out in Arizona. They bring him back, and they don't prosecute him for first-degree murder, which that's kind of, in law enforcement, we'd call that a clue.
Right.
He just walks. And Hackett's found not guilty. Hackett kind of stays out of things, and Hackett decides to go with another guy who came on the scene to Kuwait and do an armed robbery.
And who was this guy that he went with?
His name was Sullivan. He was a new actor on the 10 Hills.
Okay.
He came on after all the other crimes. I don't know how they got tied up, but Sullivan and him went to, they got phony passports, phony visas, and they went to Kuwait. They did an armed robbery. They happened to do it with a Kuwaiti informant, and they were arrested, and they did 6 years, I think, at hard labor in Kuwait.
Wow. And then he gets released and comes back to the States?
Yeah, they wouldn't. The State Department wouldn't let us go to Kuwait. I didn't want to go there anyway. I didn't even know where it was. And Bill O'Leary called me up and said, we just arrested Jimmy Hackett at JFK Airport. They released him. And they brought him in. They said, we need you to come in and testify again. So he'd been over there. I talked to Bobby Martini at the time. As you know, Bobby and I are friends. The rumor was Hackett had lost an ear, lost an eye. I saw him when he got arraigned. He looked like crap. He probably lost about 80 pounds, but he looked like he was pretty much intact. And he thought he was still. I'm not gonna rat anybody out. And the U.S. attorney, who was a very good friend of mine, saying, look, this is a real case. There's nobody to rat out. You can either plead guilty, we'll give you 5 years, or you can go to trial, and you're looking at 25 more. So he took the 5 years. They put him in the Salem House of Correction, but transferred to a federal prison. I got a call from Bill O'Leary one night, just shortly after he got transferred, and he says, are you sitting down? And I said, I am now. I said, what did he do, escape? He says, no, they killed him. He's dead.
And any idea who killed Hackett? The word was he died of natural causes, but the word on the street was they carried out. There was a contract on him, too. He got whacked. So he got whacked for shooting Bobby Martini's father, more than likely. I was just going to say, so another one of the episodes, the Winter Hill episode with Bobby Martini, he talks about an event where Hackett busted into his dad's bar and shot his father and tried to kill him as well. So, yeah. Bobby's family had a close relationship with Winter Hill, and it sounds like there was a contract put out on him, and I guess it was carried out.
That's a good assumption, and I believe it was carried out myself. I don't believe he died of natural causes. They said it was natural causes asphyxia.
And so he was really the leader of, what we call the 10 Hills gang, yeah?
Jimmy Hackett, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Grider called him the one and only when we interviewed him.
And what was Grider's attitude of, did he hate Hackett and did he hate everything that had sort of happened, or did he still maintain some loyalty there, even after them trying to kill him?
He seemed to look up to Hackett, which I never could understand, because Hackett was trying to have him killed. I couldn't quite grasp that. One of the, I guess, funny, he testified at my case, at the mail robbery. Didn't know who I was. Bill O'Leary and I had to go up and make out some forms at the U.S. Marshal's office, and they were leading Grider out that he was in protective custody. They were going to change his name and put him in the federal witness program. So O'Leary says to the feds, he knew most of them. He says, "Can we talk to John for a couple minutes?" He said, "Sure." So we go up and we talk to him, and Bill says, did a good job, John. Hope you didn't lie. He says, no, I told the truth. He says, I'm not a rat. He says, those guys dumped me on the street. Yeah. And he said, no, I know. So he said to John, he says, remember when you asked how the MDC cop was doing that you got shot? He says, yeah, how is he? He says, he looks at me and he says, he's standing right here. Why don't you ask him? The look on Grider's face was priceless. I can laugh about it now. He said to me, He says, "Hey, man, we couldn't get you off arrest. We had to shoot you." I says, "Yeah, John, I wish I only had the chance to shoot back at you guys."
Right. Well, the way that you describe it, I mean, it sounds like they did respect you. It was good cop, it was cowboys and Indians to them.
It wasn't good cop, bad cop. It was cowboys and Indians.
Yeah.
They were the bad guys. We were the good guys, and that's how it went. But he claimed they didn't start shooting until they had to, which I was in the chase. They pretty much didn't until they knew they weren't going to get away.
Right. We
chased them for a long time, and I was known as a good wheelman, and I was right on their tail the whole time.
Yeah. And Grider has since been released from federal prison?
Yes.
Do you think you know where he is? Do you know where he is? I know that you're...
I have a good idea where he is. I made some phone calls, reached out to him, and got a hold of his second wife, and never got to talk to him. I know, and I let that go finally. I'm only calling because his name's going to be in the book. And he can't talk right now. He's got laryngitis. Okay. And I talked to him about a week later. Well, he still can't talk right now, this and that, but he wants some money if you're going to use his name in the book. I said, you tell him, I said, I almost got killed on my 4th daughter's birthday. He's not getting a nickel from me.
That's right.
And I said, there's going to be nothing in there that not in the trial or in the transcript. Everything's the truth.
Did you have relief after writing the book? Because, all that stuff is sort of inside you, and when you go through the process of writing it down, going back through it, did it kind of exercise it from you, where you were able to let it go and have some peace with it?
Yeah, my wife had the right word. It was a catharsis. Everybody goes, you're healing and all this stuff. To me, that's a bunch of crap. I managed to get it all out, and I felt better getting it out. It was a catharsis for me.
Did you recognize anything going through that process that you hadn't seen along the way?
I'd seen it, the lack of cooperation between the police departments, the information that everybody withheld and wouldn't share. We could have gotten these guys a long time before that.
I was chosen for jury duty once when I was about 19 or 20 years old, and it was a rape case, and it was pretty intense. But I remember the thing that I honestly came away from it with was, wow, it is incredibly hard to actually prosecute somebody for a crime.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really, really is. Everyone luckily lives in relatively inside the lines because they're afraid of everything. But in reality, it's very hard to pin somebody down on a crime and actually get a conviction and have them, put in jail.
Plus, you're only hearing the evidence that's presented. I know a lot more than the jurors know.
Exactly, yeah.
But they did the right thing. You didn't know what they were going to do. The case was appealed to the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is in the book, and it was upheld.
And when
we arrested the gun guy, Capone, I won't get into the lawyer's name, but he had the same lawyer that the Rhode Island mob used. This guy was a big-time organized crime lawyer.
And when you retired, what year was it?
I retired officially in 97. I did 27 years.
And how big of a difference would you say there was in the force between when you started and when you left?
It was just starting to change. If I look at it now with all the negatives towards cops, which happened from a lot of the politicians, I don't think I want to be a cop nowadays.
What do you mean started to change? Change in what way?
Well, the cops are always a bad guy. So they're guilty of this, they're guilty of that. They shot an unarmed guy. This guy surrendered. And 99 times, it's a bunch of crap nowadays.
Yeah.
Sure, there's some bad cops, there's some bad shootings, but most of them are righteous. And no matter what a cop does nowadays, he's wrong.
Yeah.
And the press is against them from the beginning. I didn't run into that. The press was really good to me. Matter of fact, Ron Golovin, who was a crime reporter from Channel 5, is one of the people who worked on the book with me. He was my mentor in the book.
And what would you say socially has changed? You're originally from North Reading, but obviously you spent most of your career in and around Boston. What do you see socially? What do you see just in terms of what people are doing, not doing, safer, more dangerous?
I just see that everything the cops do is wrong. They're always looking at the negatives when the cops do something. If you do something in Wisconsin, in a small town, you're on the national news 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
I made mistakes in my career. We all did. I worked Revere Beach, which back in the day was one of the toughest places around. And some of the stuff we probably had to do physically, you'd be punished for nowadays. And it was the only way you could run the department.
Right. Wow.
I worked Revere Beach for 2 summers on walking routes and cruises, and ended up in the hospital about 4 times after being jumped, having broken ribs and so forth.
People were jumping police officers.
In uniform.
And was a lot of that drug fueled?
Yeah, a lot of it was just, a lot of people came out of it. The tough guys from East Boston were going to Revere, and they're having their own little gangs, and Revere Beach was pretty much heavily organized crime at the time.
Yeah.
And you would run into but the actual organized crime guys would take care of us. I had a couple of real heavy duty organized crime guys. But I got jumped by a few people. I took a knife away from a kid, and I got jumped by 4 or 5 of them. And next thing I know, they're getting pulled off me, and it's the gangsters that are pulling them off.
Yeah.
There was a set of rules. There are no rules now.
Yeah.
All the gangs are drugs now.
I'm going to throw out a few major crimes in Boston, and if you have any thoughts on them or any connection points, the Gardner heist. Did you ever hear much about that?
I heard a lot about it with the postal inspectors. I know Miles Connor was a prime suspect at the time. I met him a couple times.
Oh, really? Well, he was in jail in Chicago at the time, but he was close to a guy named Bobby Donati, who was actually a Revere gangster. And a lot of people think that he sort of taught Donati about Gardner, what to take, how to take it, what was valuable, but that Donati's the one that actually pulled it off.
Yeah, I heard rumors the postal inspectors knew Miles, and Miles did a concert at the Esplanade in Boston. I forget his title, like the president of rock and roll or something like that.
Okay.
And he'd already done some jail time. And he was over in the Esplanade. We met him over there. I knew he had been a prime suspect. I knew he was into art robberies and stuff. I don't know, though. That's still unsolved as far as I know.
The Blackfriars murders.
Yeah, I know a couple of cops that know about it I could talk to, but no, I don't know about the Black. I knew of it, but I don't have any information on it.
Yeah, I would love to talk to somebody. I just did a story on it, and that's one where there's really not a lot of. Most of the stuff I've read on the unsolved things, they have a real strong theory of here's who we think it was, and they either weren't convicted or they were killed before being brought to trial, that kind of thing. But the Blackfriars, it's a bit of a free-for-all. People don't know really who it was or what exactly happened there.
I know a couple of guys that are former cops, and I'll reach out to them, and I'll get a hold of you off here when I talk to them and let you know if they have anything on it. Yeah,
that would be a huge favor if we could do that.
One of them was writing a book, and I think that was part of the book, but it hasn't been out. It's not out yet.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Seems like we're all going back and writing about the day,
Well, that's the thing. I really believe that there's such a big shift happening in Boston. The reason I started Old Dirty Boston to begin with is, I grew up in Somerville. I'm third generation here. And the city's always had the same identity. It was very blue-collar, working class.
Exactly.
And
mostly Irish.
Yeah, and Greater Boston is not that anymore.
Nope.
Even to live in Somerville and Cambridge, you're talking about a different type of person, and that leads to a real shift in how people think, how they act. And there were a clearly defined set of rules years ago and for a long time, and there's a lot of conflict around, you can't do that, you can't say that, you can't act this way, you can't. And I think people just don't maybe understand the history and the context of where that comes from people who were native to Greater Boston. It was a tough place.
They don't get it at all. It's kind of.
Yeah.
One of my first duties, other than being on the tactical force during the anti-war demonstrations in Cambridge, was walking Foss Park, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I actually live right off Foss Park right now, and it's much nicer than it was. You wouldn't believe what I pay for rent to live on Foss Park.
Some of the stories I could tell about Foss Park. And then what was it? Was it the White Tower that was across the street?
From Foss Park?
The coffee shop restaurant, yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Well, there's the Dunkin' Donuts on the corner now. That's been there probably since the 90s. Yeah, that's what it is now, but ask your dad what it was back in the day. It was the White Tower or something like that. Okay.
And that was pure organized crime hangout for coffee and so forth.
Actually, after we end our call today, I'm going to be sitting down with Deanna Crimmon's mother. She was a 17-year-old girl. She was murdered in Somerville in 1995, and they never found out who killed her. But her mom has just had, such a long life of... it's really tragedy. Her brother was murdered. Yeah. Daughter was murdered. Her oldest daughter died of a drug overdose. Her husband died from drugs. Both of her sons have abuse problems. So it's just, and the crazy thing is it all ties in.
To Michael?
Well, that's Michael Crimmon's ex-wife.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and she describes him as a total psychopath. Yeah. Actually, she came in. If you had any questions for her, she had a front row seat to the Toppies and all that 10 Hills guys. She was selling them a lot of the coke.
I might sometime.
Michael had a story, or she has a story that Michael one time beat her up and suffocated her with a pillow. And he thought that he killed her, and he got up and he was yelling and screaming, I fucking killed her. He went to 10 Hills and told a couple of his buddies down there, I killed Kathy, you got to help me get rid of the body. And they actually came back to the house with the plan of taking her somewhere and getting rid of her. And she was alive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Did your dad know Jack Dwyer, who was the former Somerville cop, who was a detective lieutenant?
To be honest, I don't know. I would have to ask him.
Ask him. I'd be curious.
All right, Dana. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, or anything that you...
No, anybody wants us to read my book, it's, like I said, it's Shotgunned on Amazon, Dana Owen Shotgun, and it's on Kindle, and it's selling very well, and hopefully it's going to become a TV series or a TV movie, and time will tell.
It absolutely should. Like I said, I really can't recommend the book enough. If you have any interest in the podcast or these topics, it's an essential read. It's basically a textbook for Somerville and Boston mob in the 1970s, and I can't say how impressed I am that you wrote it, all of the research that you did, the fact that you really made the effort to make sure everything was factual by the book. You didn't cut any corners. It made a difference in the end, because I know everything that I read and everything that we talk about. I never have to second guess. You wouldn't say anything that you didn't know for sure, and that goes a long way.
I appreciate that, Jason.
Yeah, especially in this world of, a lot of these old mob guys can be kind of bullshit artists. It's really refreshing and nice to talk to somebody that's about the facts and has the integrity behind it. So yeah,
I appreciate it.
Okay, all right, Dana.
I'll keep in touch.
I think that's it for now. If there's any fill-ins, what I'll do is I'll give you a call or I'll text you and we can add them in. But I'll send you the full cut. I'll send you the edited version, and I'm hopefully we can get it out next week, because I'd like to get it out before Christmas so people can actually place orders for the book. I think that'll be really important. It'll be such a good,
really good, yeah,
a good thing. And now that I'm thinking about it, I should put together like a top 5 or top 10 books for people to read that are interested in this topic, and yours will definitely be at the top of the list. So
that'll be great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again, Dana.
Bye-bye.
You're listening to the Old Dirty Boston Podcast.